One of the key concerns with US strikes in places like Pakistan, Yemen and Somalia is that they are at times have been carried out in situations where the law of armed conflict is not applicable. And what's important here is to distinguish between the law that's applicable in times of war, which has a more permissive set of rules allowing for the use of force, allowing for fighters to be targeted, and the law in times of peace, which is much more restrictive and allows only for the use of lethal force against people presenting a very real and imminent threat to life or serious injury at the time of the incident. And this is one of the big criticisms of US practice, is that they have sought to justify strikes in places where at times there has been a real question whether there is a war ongoing there. And so there's the problem is that they are applying a framework that is very permissive, that allows people to be targeted, the laws of war, in a situation where it should not be applicable, but where they should be applying a more restrictive and constrained set of rules. And that's one of the main criticisms of NGOs and civil society in the past few years.
The drone program have made a lot of suffering for civilians who have not been acknowledged by the US government who is conducting these drone strikes. There are no official records for apologies, reported apologies, redress or legal cases taken by courts for victims. And in these cases that have reached the courts, the US government has relied on state secret privilege, which doesn't give the courts enough information to take legal cases into consideration. This denies the victims the right to remedy, a right to which they are entitled under international law. As a policy, on counterterrorism is one of the tactics of many counterterrorism approaches, and drones have not been effective because they create more harms without addressing the consequences of these harms. And it starts with first acknowledging the civilian victims. The Al-Qaeda use these flaws within the program to recruit, as a tool to recruit. The communities also have been affected, and some of these individuals hold the scars, and the ones who are in the ground are the extremist groups. You need to come up with different interventions in counterterrorism in order to eliminate the threats from the roots, not only from the surface.
What's interesting is that if you look at practice under George Bush and from 2009 onwards under Obama, in those early years there was almost nothing known about the program. They didn't explain the legal basis, they didn't explain what policy standards were in place, there was no information on civilian casualties, on specific strikes. And that secrecy has pervaded US practice, but there were some important reforms in the latter part of the Obama administration. And these, where they started to talk more about the legal and policy standards and to disclose more information about civilian casualty data. But they still lack in certain important respects. For example, the names of civilians are not ordinarily revealed. Much more information has been revealed about the isolated cases where Western civilians were killed, much less about the numerous other cases where Pakistani, Yemeni and Somali civilians have been killed.
Take, for example, the case of Yemen. Yes, the government is complicit. The former president, who ruled for 30 years, was clear about his support for drone strikes in Yemen. But there have been beneficial exchange of collaboration between in these tactics. We will have access to the space of your country, despite what the locals feel about the sovereignty of the states. in return for military aid and resources for the government, and the Yemeni government have used that, and the former regime have used that to maintain power. The governments have not been calling from the U.S. to look into these cases or demanding compensations because of higher up elitist exchange of mutual collaboration and benefits.
It's not clear exactly which direction it will go, but there are very concerning signs. And there have been recent reports that the CIA may be given a greater authority to carry out strikes in more countries and under more permissive rules, because the Obama administration had put in place some limited policy constraints on the use of force. And this is very concerning because giving more authority to the CIA will result in much greater secrecy. The military does disclose some information about strikes and seems more suited to releasing information, but the CIA is a locked box, and so there are very serious concerns that I have and many others have about the direction that the current administration is taking.